not to say that comedians can't be vulnerable. I think they can be. But I do notice that the great ones are vulnerable. I can do everything I want to do, and I don't have to, like, leave anything unsaid. There's beauty in the attempt. Like, I don't know, there's something, like, even when art is bad, it's good.
Hello and welcome to the Theater Art Life podcast, sponsored by ClearCom, the leader in voice communications for theater and the performing arts. Call your cues with the simplicity and elegance of ClearCom Intercom solutions. The Theater Art Life podcast puts the spotlight on those who create live entertainment around the world, the culture creators and the backstage masters. My name is Kat Landry. Today we are talking to Nathanael Philip Mosher. Nathanael is a comedian, poet, and singer-songwriter. As a poet, Nathan's poetry began at age 7 when he was chosen out of his 3rd grade class to read a poem about the school janitor who was leaving after 20 years of service. The poem read, "You help us not slip, you help us not trip," and so on. Thus, his penchant for rhyming and rhythm was born. At age 10, he was chosen by his 5th grade teacher to enter the Young Storytellers program, where his play about a man becoming king of the Martians was acted by Phil of the Future star Ricky Ullman. He continued to write poetry, entering in local workshops such as the historic Beyond Baroque Poetry Theater in Venice, California, and eventually the California State Summer School for the Arts at Cal Arts, where he earned notable distinction of becoming a California Arts Scholar. At the California State Summer School for the Arts, which features notable alums such as James Franco, Zac Efron, and Katherine McPhee, he learned his passion for sharing personal stories. At age 16, he began writing jokes, took to the stage, and began honing his craft at the age of 17 before he was even allowed into comedy clubs. While attending UCLA, he took advantage of the burgeoning comedy scene, running shows in lecture halls, theaters, coffee shops, classrooms, and even parking lots, while continuing to perform nightly in the larger LA area. While at college, Nathan also performed around town, even getting a fake ID to perform at bars and comedy clubs. His voracious DIY work ethic compelled him to organize a variety of out-of-town tours, bringing his trademark informal yet spellbinding words to stages in London, New York, Boston, D.C., San Francisco, and the Edinburgh Fringe Festival, as a semi-finalist in New York's NBC Stand Up for Diversity showcase. Mosher's inherent ability to hustle while fostering his craft has elevated him to more recently work with respected acts like Maria Bamford, Ali Wong, and Joe Coy. During his senior year, he proudly signed to the prestigious management company 3 Arts Entertainment, which works alongside notable clients Kevin Hart, Aziz Ansari, and Amy Poehler. Nathanael, welcome to the show.
Yeah, hello. Oh man, it's interesting hearing my bio read to me.
I can imagine,
that I've like, yeah.
So Nathanael, you have just finished a show at the Edinburgh Fringe Festival called Nathan Mosher is Injured. Can you tell us about that?
Yeah, so I wrote a one-man show. I've always wanted to, since I started stand-up, to write an autobiographical one-man show ever since I saw Dimitri Martin's one-man show, If I, which he did at the Edinburgh Fringe, and through Wikipedia, that's how I found out about it. And after, I guess they say it takes 10 years to write an hour as a comedian, and that's exactly how long it took. And it also took a whole lot of tragedy and turmoil and suffering to get the story. But I'm definitely grateful for all the lessons I've learned. And the show I got, which doing the Edinburgh Fringe finally, I would say by the end of the run, I finally got the show to where I wanted it to, despite how ridiculously hard it was to get people there. Lots of shows were canceled even in my venue because people weren't even showing up or couldn't even find the venue at one point, which was super frustrating. But yeah, I rewrote the show, and then I took it to the Vancouver Fringe, where it went a lot better, and I won the Artistic Risk Award, which was just such a huge surprise, and also just I was incredibly grateful for the fact that the organization recognized the risk it took to to do this show and tell the story, but also just like go through what I went through. So
Yeah,
yeah,
that's
it was good.
amazing. You say it's more of an autobiographical story. Is there something specific that you focus on in it?
Yeah, so the show's called Nathan Mosher is Injured because when I was like 19, I went to this band called Us the Duo with my sister, and they got like famous on Vine. They did these 6-second covers, and then they revealed their faces on Good Morning America, and they were telling the story of how that happened through their music. And I thought it was really cool how the show ended at the current moment, like them on stage in their first nationwide tour. And I was like, I want to do that show. Like, what's the story behind me becoming a comedian and all this stuff. And I was like, well, if it would have to end on with me on stage in Edinburgh, so it'd have to be like a story of how I got to Edinburgh in a way. And so it made me do all this self reflection. I wasn't doing a lot of personal material at the time, and so it made me start writing about like trauma and just like why do I do this? Really asking like why, because it just was an obsession. Stand up. I had no idea. It just hits you and then you can't stop. And so asking why led me to sort of self-examine. And then I went to London to study abroad and then check out the Fringe Festival. This was right after I graduated college, five years ago now. And I'm heading over to a gig in Cheshunt, like an hour out from London, and I trip on a curb and I twist my ankle, and I was like, man, I'm always getting hurt. Like, I've been getting hurt ever since like my first injury at 12. And I was like, man, I'm always getting hurt. Right. Ali Wong had just released a special where she's pregnant on stage. I was like, man, I'm going to be in crutches on stage, like, on my special. So, but then I realized, I was like, oh, that's the thread, like injury. And then, and then unfortunately right after that, then I grew a huge breakdown, and sort of got out of it. And I actually like stopped performing, couldn't do it. But when I came back, I was like, I have the show. Like I have an hour now. And I was like, it's about injury, like all forms of it, because I realized that that's like what led me like through a series of unfortunate events. I was a pitcher, and I hurt my arm, and then just sort of, I talk about it in the show, but how I feel like that was a sort of turning point for me, because I kept getting hurt. I went through puberty, started caring about girls, like less about academics, because I was like winning a lot of awards for like academic performance, and I was a good pitcher. And then I got in a relationship, I got cheated on, which started writing poetry. That's kind of like I've always written poetry, but that's like really got me hooked to like starting writing poetry in my notebook. And then and then the best and worst thing ever happened to me. I got obsessed with stand-up comedy. and and at the time, because I had gotten hurt so much, I'd tell people I wanted to be an orthopedic surgeon, because I knew I wanted to do some sort of like science-oriented medical thing. I don't know if that was like choice, but also just I had the grades. I don't know if you kind of just reach for the stars with that. And I did this work shadow program where I got to sit one on one. I'm basically quoting my show without the like added frills of jokes and stuff. But I had a one on one meeting with Dr. Osborne, this guy who started this practice from scratch, and he would do this work shadow program where you could shadow different surgeons. And he says, if there's anything you could picture yourself doing besides doing surgery, do that. Because he just basically is like, giving a motivational type speech, but like, this is life. You have to have, this is really hard. And he explained how difficult it is and how much he had to overcome to get to where he is. And at the time I had just been obsessively watching stand up. And so I was like, I guess I got to try stand up. And he also said, like, you have to be good at it too. Like, you can't just suck at something and want to. But so I was like, I got to find out if I'm good at this. And I was okay. Like, I was bad, but I wasn't good. Like, you're not supposed to be great when you first start. But I was hooked and couldn't stop. And so that's kind of like the through line of the show. And I mean, I've found a lot of just threads, I guess, as I've done the show, and you find things that connect and callbacks and all these different things that you didn't even know. I guess looking at your own life, it really forced me to connect the dots, and so the show evolved like tremendous. I mean, I don't know. It's probably like in its 37th draft or something, and now it's done. Like I'm like it's done. But even in Vancouver, the judges, when they were announcing the award, they were like, all five judges saw it. They were like, we saw a different show because he was working on it, and that made them like it even more. They were like, wow, he's like, it's evolving in front of our eyes. And then the guy who like presented, I think he was at the last show where it was like the final version. So he saw the final version. It was like the best show. It was the biggest audience. They laughed at every single joke, but felt at all the emotional parts, and so it was just like it made all the failure in Edinburgh worth it.
Good.
Like, okay, this wasn't like a waste of investment, especially considering how much money it cost. So yeah, it's I don't know. I just said a lot of different things, but that yeah, it's my life. Like I'd say by the end it really became a sort of like testimony, if anything, and it was definitely like oh wow, okay, I finally figured out the truest way to express these things, and that original idea of like I want to do a show that ends in the current moment of me on stage in Edinburgh. And I didn't realize to get to that story, I had to like fail at Edinburgh, and it and not like in my head, I'm like, oh, it's gonna end on me on stage, it's selling out, getting great reviews, all this stuff, and it was like, no, it wasn't about that. It was about the fact that even though I've come out the other side of depression and anxiety and trauma, like the like it's the battle's not over. Like life is cyclical, and I might be better. One of the technicians at the show at Edinburgh, who was just great. His name's Chris, and he worked at the C venues, and he got to the National Theater at like age 26, and so he was crying like after the show because he was like, this was my life. I got to the pinnacle, top of the mountain, I wasn't happy, and I'm not famous or anything, but like I sort of got to the point where like all the doors were opening for me. Like my friend told me like her boyfriend at the time saw me. I was 21 and I was doing this show, and he was like, "Oh, that's your friend? Oh my God, that guy's gonna be like, like get people telling you that, and like all the superstar, like just random people saying that, and then all the doors sort of open, and I was afraid of them, I was like, oh, I was afraid of the success, so I just ran away. And so he said his dad will always say it is what it is, but he'll say it isn't what it was. And he's like,
that's a good one.
Yeah, I was like, and he's like, the only constant in life is change. And he described, like the cyclical nature of life, but he was like, the way he sees it is like a spiral that's not only moving inward, but also up.
Mm-hmm.
And then I said, oh, like a poop, isn't that just a poop emoji? And then he was like, oh my God, that's true comedy.
That's one visual for it.
Yeah, like, right. Yeah, no, just slowly going up. And so I see it there very much that way, because I can't say that I'm out of the clear with like, struggling, but I don't struggle as much.
Mm-hmm. Good. Good.
So, yeah.
Well, I think it's really admirable that you've been able to create something beautiful out of your pain, and that's the best you can hope for, right? So you mentioned that it takes 10 years to write an hour as a comedian. I find that very interesting. Could you tell us a little bit about your writing process, and what does that actually look like? Are you scribbling notes of things that you see throughout the day, or are you someone who has, their own little space that they go to kind of dump everything out? I know you mentioned you did something like 37 iterations of your show. Could you just walk us through your writing process?
my process, I would say, is always changing currently, I'm finding new things, but I can describe the writing process of this particular show.
That'd be great.
Which is, when I started feeling better. So I started working with kids, and that's a huge part of the show. I started working at after school care and working with preschool kids. And that's what I've been doing for the past few years out of college. I realized that as I sort of gotten into the career of being a comedian, that there's all this administrative work that sort of starts to bog you down and to the business of it. And so the actual creative part of it gets pushed to the side sometimes, where when I first started, I set it a goal. I had to write every day for 2 hours, and I wasn't doing that as much. And you start to like write on stage, which is not as great as writing. I mean, as a writer, I find it's much better to write with the pen and the pad. At least that's what I love. And I realize George Carlin said he's a writer who has to perform his stuff. Like, to me, the performance part of it is like just the final stage in editing, because you need to share it with the audience and to get that sort of in time feedback. But I love just sitting down and writing. And so I was like, I got to get back to that. So when I stopped feeling depressed and motivated again, I would just drink a cup of coffee and go straight to a coffee shop and write for an hour. And I was like, I'm not going to write jokes. I'm just going to write. Like, I organized everything I'd ever done or written into like a giant Google Docs, where it was categorized by category, and I would just press control, and I could press control F if I need to find something, but I started by just going through that and sitting there for an hour, and anything that wrote itself, like I tried to write and it just kept flowing out, spilling out like it hit a vein, like that song lyric. If it did that, then I kept going. If it didn't, and I did that for a while. And after a month, I started to get excited about the premises. So then I returned to the stage after like 6 months of not performing. And then I opened for Maria Bamford and got like some of the jokes in that 5-minute set are like still in the show to this day. And so that's sort of like started the genesis of it. And I just kept adding and taking away, and eventually had like a sort of raw, like 2 hours worth of stuff to sift through. So then once I got to that point, Mike Birbiglia will he'll just invite people over and to read a script or something that he's working on. And he says he always buys them pizza, because like, who doesn't love pizza? So I was like, all right, I'll just do that. And so I invited all my friends. And I think the first one I did was on my birthday. I invited all my friends. I created like a questionnaire, like a targeted feedback form, because I had what I did was I used the Save the Cat. I've never actually read the book Save the Cat, but I was like, I want this to feel like a movie. So I took that and I found an outline and I inputted my jokes, or my material, the stuff I had, like, into that. And I noticed the gaps. Like, I was like, oh, so what is the fun and games, of my story? And I was like, oh, it's this. And I looked through the stuff I've been wanting to write about, and was like, I don't have any jokes about that. So I was like, so I have to write material. I just have to write the story. And it was what was interesting. That was the first time like the jokes sort of flowed out of the story rather than me just looking for the funny. And that was really cool. Another challenge was like I have material about getting 5150 arrested, and I was trying to write jokes about that, and they all felt inauthentic. And I realized I have to, like, the only way for me to authentically write jokes about this is I have to communicate the feeling, because what I wanted was I was like, how can you understand something like this if you've never had it? And I was like, well, then that means I have to act and actually live the trauma on stage in front of you, but in the writing phase, I had to basically close my eyes and feel that emotion and remember it, and then write the truth of that, and then let the jokes sort of bubble up to the top. And I got, then the jokes did flow out of that, and it was authentic because the setup communicated the feeling and the joke was the relief rather than just trying to provide relief. And so there was a lot of that. Like, it was a lot of trying to, and when I write music, which was so the way the music thing happened was, I had started writing covers and stuff, and like working. I've always played piano, and I started to learn how to like sing and play at the same time, and but it was kind of like, in the background. And then I had this one poem that I wrote, and I wanted to put it in the show because as I started to see like other people break the form, I was like, what? I had this vision of like, oh, it'd be so cool if there was poetry in the show, and music, and all these different things, because and in my head I was like, I'll have other poets feature on like, it would be like a one man show, but other poets write but as I started performing, I was like, oh yeah, I have to learn how to, like, I have to become a spoken word poet too, because that's, because I did it, and I was like, people were like, you're really good at this. And I was like, yeah, I mean, poetry is actually the first thing I ever wrote. Like, comedy's kind of, I abandoned poetry because I was like, you can't make money as a poet. I thought you had to be just like a professor or something. So I was like, oh, I can't be a poet. Then I went to the poetry lounge, and I'm like, wait, you guys like do this? And people, anyways. So I was doing this poem that I wrote. It was inspired by a song called No One Knows Me Like the Piano in My Mother's Home by Sampha. But it's called No One Knows Me Like the Notebook in My Mother's Home. And so I recorded it with my dad's best friend. He's a sound engineer, a composer, and just like he's my godfather technically, I think, or he's my sister's godfather. For some reason, we have two different godfathers. But I recorded me playing the piano and then doing the poem over it, and then in the verse breaks, I sing the chorus. So I was like, okay, I'll do that as part of the show. And I did it, and one guy came to one of the workshops, this poet, and he said, my only feedback to you is that you should sing more. And I had been trying to write songs and never finishing them. And so I was like, all right, I should try and write a song. And then that Monday, like, he told me that it was a Saturday night, and that Monday I wrote a song on the spot. And it was like the first song I ever finished, and it's the first song in the show. So yeah, that was sort of the genesis of like me becoming a songwriter. And so I started working with my uncle, and he's like, well, if you're gonna have music in the show, and you're gonna go to Edinburgh, you should record an EP so that you have something to, like, if you want to listen to it later. And then he sends me this long email, and he's like, I want to do it for free. He has cancer. He's at a place where he can just afford to, do passion projects with people, and then, have paid projects. He's like, I'm gonna produce it for free. So yeah, we got to work on an EP, and then the pandemic happened, and the Edinburgh didn't happen, but I got to finish the EP. So that's how I became into music. And then once I wrote that first song, it was like the floodgates opened, because I already knew theory and piano. I knew, like, I took 10 years of classical training. I took exams. I knew all this stuff. I just didn't know how to apply it. And then once I figured it out, it's like, oh, music. I started learning to produce on GarageBand and Logic. And so then, yeah, just music became a huge thing. And that sort of became like a focus. And I stopped performing stand-up as much. As I started to have the backbones of the show, I was like, oh, I don't really need to like go out and workshop this stuff at open mics or shows. Like, I can just do it as an hour and workshop it that way. Yeah, and then I just started doing sets where I was like, I'm just going to do everything in that set. And I'm going to weave my jokes into a narrative with the music and the poetry and put them in an order that it's telling a story. And it was going well. I was like, wait, I can just be really emotional and sad or somber or passionate with my music, or, this with the poetry, and then immediately go back into the jokes. And like, no one is like, this is uncomfortable. They're like, that was better than just jokes.
That's great.
Yeah. Now I'm like in this weird place where I'm like, or I not even in this weird place anymore. I'm just accepting it, that like after Edinburgh, I was like, oh, I'm not just a comedian anymore. And like, I don't actually really enjoy just being up there with the jokes and no vulnerability, like just trying to make people laugh. It feels like I'm high, like it feels the least vulnerable of the art forms that I can do. And not to say that comedians can't be vulnerable. I think they can be, but I do notice that the great ones are vulnerable, but like it's really hard to get there. Whereas with poetry, it's like if you're not vulnerable right away, then there's 0 point. And I think also that does come from the fact that like most poets don't make money. So like no one's doing it for the money. They're literally doing it just to get this off their chest. And comedy, I unfortunately I think is like so saturated and so commercial and so commodified that it does become like it can just become like a skill, or a trade, like there's and then they call it a craft. And I agree, like it's not bad to have it craft. There's a craft to these things, but so I don't know where that's going to lead in terms of like me finding that I know I'm not gonna just do comedy anymore. I'm gonna do all these things. Like where does where does the stand up lie in the sort of grand scheme of things? And I'm like, for me, it's like just another tool of like expression, but it's not. It can't be the end all be all. And also, I'm not. I had one. I remember like the craziest. I was like deep in my depression, and I did this show in Ventura, and this guy comes up to me. He's like, "How old are you?" I'm like 22. He's like, "Holy shit! I watch a lot of comedy. No, like I watch a lot of comedy. You're the funniest person I've ever seen." And when I said I was 22, he's like, "You're gonna be a fucking superstar." And yes, people say that to me, and I was like, okay, I am funny, but I watch someone like Dave Chappelle, and I'm like, what I bring to the table is not that. Like I'm not as raw funny as he is. I'm thoughtful. You know what I mean? Like I can bring wisdom and thoughtfulness and authenticity, and I know that Dave Chappelle also brings that too. But like he finds like when he talks about comedy, he's like he thinks that he can express everything just through a person on stage with a microphone. And I feel like I also need a piano. I also need poetry. Like I need a lot of different things to get the message across. And not to say that one day I won't be able to just me and a microphone say everything I want to say. So, but I found that when I have a piano there too, or when I have a notebook, like I can do the whole, like, I can do everything I want to do, and I don't have to, like, leave anything unsaid.
I love that. And now a note from our sponsor. The Theater Art Life podcast is proud to be sponsored by ClearComm. ClearComm is the leader in voice communications for theater and the performing arts. Call your cues with the simplicity and elegance of ClearComm Intercom solutions. You can find them at ClearCom.com. Go check them out. It sounds to me like you being a storyteller first is probably what's making you so successful. I'm curious about your process for testing out material. You mentioned a little bit earlier about kind of surveying your friends. I'm curious about how the iterations of your show come about. Who are you asking? Like, what kind of pool is it that you're surveying, and how do you actually do that? And how do you choose also what to actually move forward with, knowing that it's such a subjective thing?
Oh, yeah. Well, the feedback forms that I would create were super targeted because I find when you just ask someone regular general feedback, like, what did you think? They, first off, don't want to tell you because they don't want to hurt your feelings. Or they want to say only the things to hurt your feelings because they think, like, you want me to be brutal. Like, they go to the extremes. And then but it's never targeted. It's always vague. You know what I mean? Like, what do you think? Oh, it was good. How, you know what I mean? And then they go, oh, I'm not qualified to do that. I'm not a comedian. And what's funny about like people giving feedback is I actually read this book. And in the book, I can't remember which book it was, but it talked about expertise. And it said that, a food critic goes to a place and they eat something and they can tell you all the reasons why it was good and all the reasons why it was bad. And they can use all this terminology and go as specific in depth, right? They have the same taste buds as you do. Like, so if they eat something from McDonald's and you eat something from McDonald's, and then you guys eat something from a gourmet 5-star restaurant and they eat something, like both of you are going to be like, McDonald's was good, but not as good as this. But if you ask a non-expert, or a non-person who's practicing that, why, they'll just go, I don't know, it just wasn't as good. But if you ask that food critic, they'll explain. And so when you really get like someone to explain themselves and give them targeted, feedback, they can get to that point. Like I remember I showed my friend this comedian, and Mitch Hedberg, who I love, and like he's a one-liner guy. My friend didn't like it at first, and then all of a sudden he started to get it and he liked it. And I took him to this show, and we went to the show, and it was a one-liner guy, and he was like, one-liners aren't my thing. And I was like, that's not true. You liked Mitch Hedberg. But as an expert, like as someone who's spent, tons of hours analyzing comedy, I knew exactly what was off about the hour. I was like, he every time he grabbed the cup, it's because he didn't remember the next joke, and I could see him thinking. So there's a lack of fluidity. So the one-liners didn't cascade into the other one, creating a buildup of things. So he never got to the point where the jokes were fully hitting and the rhythm was off. And I was like, I could see all these things. And I was like, that's what was wrong with it. But I can understand that. So my feedback was super targeted. A lot of it had to do with the save the cat format, So it's like I would say, like, here's where the dark night of the soul is supposed to be. Do you feel like that adequately conveyed that? What I have the document somewhere, but it was like it's very targeted so that they can. And then the taking the feedback is, after that it's, I don't know, it's very like it didn't feel like uncomfortable because like it's more targeted. You know what I mean? Versus someone just saying like I didn't like it, and then you go why, and then they don't know, and then you just feel that. But if they say I didn't like it because at this moment, you I mean, sometimes people like your music performance, and like literally after a show on Monday that I did, like someone's like, I just couldn't understand the words at this part. Like, if they just said I didn't like the song, then you might be like, the song's bad, but they're like, no, I couldn't understand the words, and you're like, oh, so the words aren't bad, the content's not bad, I just need to speak clearly into the microphone. It's like easy fix, So that's how I look for feedback. It's like it's very targeted, and I'm asking for what I'm looking for and what I need. And then the hardest part is taking that in and then like cutting stuff. The hardest part was cutting things. I got a review in Edinburgh that was like hit me really hard, but like everybody else read it well and I didn't read it well. But actually it ended up being helpful. Like it made the show better. But what it forced me to do was like cut all the material, the jokes that were like not servicing the story. And I had been told by someone who's from a clowning background and has had success in Edinburgh. He saw my show and he said, the best parts of your show are when you're vulnerable, when you're not funny, but your funny has to be so ridiculously funny that you warrant that. And he's like, I personally need jokes, last every 12 seconds and this. And so I thought, okay, like I need to pack jokes in. But what that forced me to do was just pack punchlines where there was no reason to have it. Just throwing in misdirections because I thought I needed that. Took out all that stuff. And then I did it in Vancouver. And I thought it was so funny because then a girl came up to me and she was like, your show was the funniest thing I've seen here. And I was like, I took out the jokes and it made it funnier. Because the jokes that were there just were warranted, And so, I don't know. I'm still figuring out, like, solicited feedback I can handle. But unsolicited one, it's like, I was like, I shouldn't read reviews because, I've heard a lot of writers, they go, I don't read reviews. But then I also look up to Kobe, and Kobe in an interview when he was like 18, he said, they asked him like, what do you say to people who give you unsolicited feedback where they're like, you need to work on your jump shot if you want to make the NBA, or you shouldn't go to college, you should go to college first, then go to the NBA, you shouldn't enter straight out of high school. And he said, whatever they tell me, I do it. And then I come back to them and say, I did what you told me, check it out. What do you think? I thought that was really interesting because if you take that approach, they still might be wrong, but now they know they're wrong because you go, I did exactly what you told me and it didn't work. But if it does work, then it just works. And you go, thank you. And so that's something I'm learning, where it's like, I have to actually, if someone gives me feedback, first I have to go, am I willing to try this? If I'm not willing to try it, then I can just be like, whatever you told me, it's not serviceable. I can't use it. But if I'm willing to try it, if it's something I can do, like, I should just do it. And then, yeah, if it didn't work, I'd be like, hey, your feedback was incorrect. They'll be like, all right, whatever. you know?
That seems like a good philosophy to me, especially as you're kind of building out material. Speaking of which, what exactly are you thinking is coming next? Are you going to continue working on your show? Is there something new in the pipeline? Is there some place you'd love to be or something you'd love to be doing?
So with the show, I want to do, I found a local venue that I'm going to do it. I want to do it regularly in LA and sort of have like a home base, because the larger goal of the show, which I've always wanted to do, is do the show, but then also have mental health organizations present, so that after the show, if someone's feeling vulnerable and wants to talk about it, they're not just talking to me after the show and then I'm like, see you later, and then they have to just, there's no follow-up, because people would cry like, someone told me, she was like, I wish my brother could be here, and I was like, where's your brother? And she's like, he committed suicide. And it's like, I want the people who need the show to be there, and if it makes them feel hope that there's a path, like a continuation of that, rather than something I talked about with my uncle, where it's like, I'm not necessarily the person to provide that next step. Not because I don't want to, I might just not have the resources. And he talked about how, like, in church, for example, like, you might hear a sermon, and then afterwards, the church is like, okay, go to this small group or get plugged in with this community. Like, they're always like, here's what you do after this. Apply this in your life. So that's what I want to do. And so once I get the venue, I'm gonna hit up all these mental health organizations and figure out exactly how I want to structure it. I'm not entirely sure, but I want to do that locally and serve as a pilot run, because eventually the goal would be to take that to different cities, take it to colleges, high schools, maybe even, and do the show, and then have the work. So that's sort of like the immediate. And then also, actually, because I won an award in the Vancouver Fringe, I'm eligible for this $3,000 touring bursary at the Brighton Fringe. And I wanted to do it, like, I was like, man, this is a lot of work to apply to this thing. Can I do it next year because I'm eligible? And they're like, no, you actually can only, like, it's, if you won this award, you can do it for the next year. So I have to do that by January 6th, and which means I have to, like, revamp my website, like, try and actually build, like, a sort of, like, press pack and touring, So, because I got back and I was burnt out, like, and super tired. And then I knew I was going to get depressed because of all that sort of build up. And then sort of, like, it's been tough. I quit my job as a preschool teacher. And so and I was like, should I go back to that? But I was also like, I think I need something more flexible, pays more, long term. And so in my immediate future I want to build up a sort of business in that respect of tutoring, but like all different subjects. I'd like to do piano lessons. I'm obsessed with chess, teaching chess. Like, I'm like, okay, so I'm building a website called NathanMosher'sHereToHelp.com. And it'll just be like, here's all the things I do. And if I'm getting really idealistic about it, it'll eventually be sliding scale. Like, pay what you want. But that's if I can have enough consistent income, like, on other things, that I can get to that point. But yeah, and then I have another show idea that I have the backbone of. But what I've seen with this show, where it took me 10 years to have the material, and then 4 years of the actual writing process, and that just how many iterations. I'm like, yeah, this thing is like a seed, and I just gotta water it a little bit every day or every so often, so that it continues to grow, and then as stuff percolates, it'll hit that sort of, like, growth spurt. that I've seen happen. Like the backbone of this one man show was this children's book idea I had for like a long time. And it took me months just thinking about it. And then all of a sudden I wrote it, like the first draft of it, like in 2 days. So I understand that that's sometimes how it works, where it's like you keep working on the idea and then all of a sudden you're like, I've been thinking about this for, months and being like, why am I not writing? Why am I not writing it? And then all of a sudden it happens. So I know that working on new music, working on just always writing stuff, playing a whole lot of chess because I got super obsessed with it. And so it's kind of like, I play tournaments now and stuff. So like, that's been a big thing. Yeah. Just figuring out, like, I need to become financially independent. So that's like more important. I mean, my art's very important, but I'm like, I can't do anything unless
you can't make art if you can't eat.
Exactly.
Yes.
So that's really what's next for me, is just like, I'm at a coffee shop right now. I'm moving potentially. So it's like, there's a lot of change happening.
Yeah. Well, it sounds like you have a lot of good going for you and you're working on a lot of things. So that's very exciting. I love the idea of having mental health resources available to your audiences. I think that's really admirable. I hope that works out for you. So, Nathanael, we end every podcast with the same 2 questions that I'm going to ask you now. Number 1 is, what is your favorite thing about your job or the industry as a whole?
Actually, I went to an open mic last night and I like went up with no material, which I've only done once ever, but I was like, I don't want to do jokes. But my friend from Seattle, who I met over the pandemic, wants to do stand up. And so I was like, let's go. And so he did it for his first time. And there was a lot of people that were really bad. And there was a lot of people that were good. And I was like, man, I remember how like awful this is, but like there's beauty in the attempt.
Yeah.
Like, I don't know, there's something like even when art is bad, it's good. Like, does that make sense?
Yes, it does.
Yeah. Like, so that was, I don't know, that was something that was different last night. I was like, I still enjoy that person bombing because I'm like, you're trying, or like you're trying to get out of your situation in life through this. You might not be doing a great job. You might have a lot of unresolved trauma that, you're putting out on stage that you should probably be talking about with a therapist. But your intention is you're just trying to feel better. And I think like there's something beautiful about that,
There's beauty in the
knowing
attempt.
that I'm definitely not the first person to say that though. I'm plagiarized that or something. Yeah. That's like, because people like they say I went bungee jumping and like I was really scared, and so I didn't do it. I chickened out. But part of the reasoning, the mental reasoning why I chickened out, was because people were saying that they're more afraid of doing comedy than bungee jumping off a cliff, and I was like, that's ridiculous. and I was like, you know what? I don't need to jump off this cliff because I want to keep that. Like, you're telling me this is my thing that you're afraid of. Like, I don't need to do everything I'm afraid of. Like, like my friends like do the things that scare you, but also don't jump in front of a bus. Like, if you have something that scares you that makes you feel alive, like you don't need to constantly do everything that's gonna put you in danger. Like, you just need that one thing that pushes the boundaries of your life and existence. And, eventually I'll work my way back up to doing things that scare me, both physically and this. And there's all those levels of like breaking through, the barriers of life. But yeah, it's just crazy. The fact that like doing this job, people are more afraid of, like, they're more afraid of getting on stage and talking about their feelings in a microphone than jumping out of a plane. Like, that's crazy to me. So there's certainly beauty in the attempt because, like, to other people, to me, it's no big deal. I've been public speaking my whole life. the first time I did it, I was super nervous doing stand-up, but that sort of like, I don't know, you just like getting on stage and talking about stuff is easier sometimes than talking about it with no stage. And I think that's because like there's structure, and there's, like you get to curate how you talk about it, and you can manipulate it. But when you're just talking in real life, like, you have no control, And so I just think it's crazy that's like, people are more afraid to do this than to jump out of a plane.
Well, maybe better you than the rest of us.
Yeah, somebody has to do it.
Yes,
like,
it's true.
Is what I realized. Like somebody has to, and you don't do this because the true people who do it, they realize that it's because they have to do it, because not only, it becomes a service, and people, and my friend, he goes, if you stop writing poetry, I'm gonna stop being your friend. He's like, as your friend, I need your poetry, and so if it's just for me, you have to do it. So if you're like, I'm sad, and I was like, I'm gonna show up to your house, and I'm gonna grab you, and I'm gonna be like, you do this. And so, eventually it's like if you're not gonna do it, no one else will. Yeah.
Good point. If you could change one thing about your job or the industry as a whole, what would it be?
Yeah, I would change the fact that it's an industry, I guess. Like, or that word, like it's a commodity. It's like, me and my friend talked about it. He, like, in the UK, there's so many grants for art, and in the US, it's like, I looked for grants to like do my show and stuff, and it's like, you have to live in San Francisco. It's like, San Francisco loves art, but the US doesn't, And I know we're all sorts of different states and stuff, but yeah, this country we'd rather have entertainment than art. And I think art confronts and entertainment escapes. And I think they can be the one and the same. You can have something that confronts and gives you an escape and relief, but you cannot get the relief until you confront it. And I think a lot of our entertainment here is just like focused on that, and it sells, like, sugar sells, but it's not actually good for you, And so that I would change that, but also I think that's a larger problem, like with economic society, capitalism, that can't necessarily be like immediately fixed, but that's what I don't know how to change that. I just acknowledge that it's an issue, and I think it will eventually just change on its own, like everything does, when it ceases to make money or ceases to work, or harms the people who are in charge.
I agree that we could definitely use some more arts funding. Well, thank you so much for joining us today, Nathanael. This was a really great conversation. I'm so glad we got to hear some of your story. And where can we find you? Where can we hear your stories or watch your shows?
I feel like right now you can find me at a coffee shop or at my house, just because I'm currently trying to rebuild everything. Like my website, I haven't updated in a long time. I'm not on social media, but I want to make more stuff on Patreon. And so, my website is nathanmosherisgoodenough.com. That is probably going to be the best way to find me. Because when I do update it, when I do the things, it's all going to go on there. Eventually I'm going to build a website for the show, but like that will be like home base. Like,
great.
That's the goal. It's like home base, nathanmosherisgoodenough.com.
Awesome.
So that website exists. It's not updated, but that's where you will find me. Yeah.
Well, we will keep an eye out for Nathan Mosher. Thank you so much for joining us.
Yeah, absolutely.
Theater at Life is a global media site for entertainment. Memberships start at only $38 per year. You can have unlimited access to our daily published articles, including entertainment news and the writings of active industry professionals, ensuring that you are always up to date on the global happenings in the world of entertainment. Become a part of the international entertainment community and join us now. at www.theaterartlife.com.